Hi, Sarah-Jane. Welcome back to Map the
Hi,
Maze.
Sarah.
And I am delighted today to be joined by Sarah-Jane, who is a French solicitor,
Yeah. French family lawyer and Hong Kong foreign
oh, Hong
lawyer
Kong foreign lawyer, and an English and Hong Kong mediator.
in French. Yeah.
I really hoped that Sarah-Jane could join me just to have a conversation around some of the aspects around French couples and some of the challenges, some of the expectations that people have, especially when they come from a different jurisdiction. But first, can I just ask you, Sarah-Jane, can you just tell us how you got started in family law and why?
Well, thank you, Sarah, for inviting me. First of all, so I've always been interested in family law. It's something that, as a student, I was really passionate about. But when I qualified, international family law wasn't as popular as it is today. So I qualified and then worked in-house in charities, dealing with family law issues in one of them. So it was something that was always in the background, but I didn't really dive into it until I arrived in Hong Kong. Fast forward a few years. And when I arrived in Hong Kong, I kept meeting people who were asking me whether I was a family lawyer because they'd been through a divorce and it was very difficult for them. And they just wanted to discuss their case with me, or because they were thinking of a divorce and they wanted a French lawyer. So that's how I really started my practice as an international family lawyer, French qualified, to assist all those people in Hong Kong, French nationals, because as we know, the French community is very big
Very
in
big.
Hong Kong. Sometimes we feel like we're in Paris when we're walking in the
Totally.
streets of Hong Kong. So it really, that's where it really started for me, was in Hong Kong yeah, because there was a need for a French speaking family lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting observation because I only mediate in English, and I often work with people for whom English is maybe not their first language, maybe not even their second language, but it's maybe the shared language for that couple, or they can't find someone that can speak their native language. But what do you think? I mean, I can see what I feel like clients will get from speaking to somebody about their challenges in their own language. But what do you think a French speaker gets from speaking to a French speaking lawyer?
Well, what I observed is that some of them spoke English,
Mm,
in their
yeah,
work. They're very good. They, they still speak English and French at home, but so they would say, first of all, oh, we'll speak in English. There's no problem. And then
yeah,
when we start talking about emotions or things like that, they'll switch to French. So it's what they will look at. Some of them are looking for a
mm,
French speaker because they don't speak
yeah,
English, and that's quite, the majority of French expats. They don't always the wives,
mm,
if they're not working, or the husband, if he's not working, don't speak that well English because they tend to stay in their French
yeah.
bubble. But those who do speak English, it's nice to know that they can switch from one to the other.
Yeah. I feel like also it's just there's something about being able to express yourself in your most natural words that's comforting at a time when everything else is difficult and chaotic and challenging, to just be able to use a word and know the other person gets it is
Yeah,
really important
that's
because
really
sometimes, so even though I work with people who can speak English, there have been times, particularly with French speakers, where all of a sudden they're like, just hold on a second. And then generally the volume's a bit higher, that they'll want to speak to each other directly in French because
yeah.
it's another layer of complication to struggle to explain it in English when they know that the person they're trying to negotiate with will actually understand the French more easily. It's really helpful to be able, particularly for your lawyer, to have that ability to communicate easily.
Yeah, definitely, and that's what they were lacking when they go and see an
Yeah.
English-speaking lawyer in Hong Kong. there were things, I mean, we'll talk about it more in a few minutes, but it's really about, there's so many different things that if you add to that the layer of the language, it makes it very, very
Yeah,
difficult.
you're right. It is so emotional for most people. When we see them, sometimes I'm sure you've seen people who maybe have been separated 5, 6, 7, 10 years and now are deciding to get things sorted out. But most people don't come at that stage. Most people come when it's still quite raw. Everything is very
Yeah,
heated. It's very like intense and close to the surface. So yeah, that emotionality needs to be expressed to someone that understands.
exactly.
Yeah. No, it's a tough time. I mean, I guess maybe could you talk a little bit about your practice at the moment? Because I know that you're practicing in Hong Kong and in the UK and in France.
Yes. So because my job is to assist French national outside of
Yeah.
France, I'm based in the UK and I work in Hong
Yeah.
Kong also in a Hong Kong law
Hmm.
firm, JC Legal. And so I'm supposed to do the same work, but the needs of expats in Hong Kong and in England are very
Mm.
different in the sense that in Hong Kong, it's more expats that are there for a limited
Hmm.
time and more and
Yeah.
more. There's less of people who are, like there used to be people who'd say, well, we'll stay there until the
Yeah.
end. Now it's more people that come for 3 to 5 years. Whereas in England, it's more people who have married an English
Right.
person who are in England and usually don't think about going for to see a French lawyer
Mm.
because they just see themselves as
Yeah.
British. And so it's very interesting to see the differences. But at the end of the day, as you say, they're always relieved to find somebody who can speak French.
Well, I think I mean, it's that, and it's also, I guess, understand context. Because I think when people, particularly if they've left their home country, they live, work, marry in another country, they still bring with them their expectations from their home country of what they've
Exactly.
seen, growing up or from their family and friends. Yeah. Can you maybe just share what you think some of those expectations are that people have about what divorce and marriage and separation look like from a French perspective, even if you're living
So
overseas?
from yeah, French perspective is, as you may know, that in France, it's all about the marital
Mm.
contract. So it's the basis of everything because even if you don't go to a notary to sign a marital contract, you always have what is called a matrimonial regime that will apply. And this matrimonial regime dictates the way your assets will be divided in the event of a divorce or
Mm.
death. In France, it's very important, it's both. And so, but it doesn't include maintenance. So it's very difficult that, because there's this idea which is changing that in Hong Kong we don't have
Mm.
prenups. If we do, people think, oh, they won't be applied. So I've got this French marital contract, so it won't be applied in Hong Kong. So who cares? That's one of the ideas. Whereas in
Mm.
France, you know that you'd have a rough idea of how the division of assets will apply, and then you'll ask for maintenance if you need it. And for instance, there's this idea that if you divorce in Hong Kong, you'll have much more than if you divorce in France. Because if the example I always
Yeah.
tell my clients is if you go before a judge in
Hmm.
France and you live in Hong Kong and you say, well, in Hong Kong, I will be entitled to what they usually say half of everything plus spousal support and all that. Well, in France, a judge will be a woman in her 40s, divorced. So a single
Yeah.
mother trying to and not earning very much. So it's going to be very difficult to convince a French judge
Yeah.
that you need much more. So that's one of that's usually what I say. I say, of course, you could be entitled to
Mm.
that, but in France, it's not
Mm.
likely that, you would get that. Of course you can, but
Yeah,
it's
it's not
just the
likely. Yeah.
first, the main
Yes.
difference that I find, because of course you're not talking, it's not the same wages, because we're talking usually in Hong
Mm,
Kong about expat divorces
yes.
versus,
Domestic.
people,
Yeah.
normal people in
Yeah.
France. So it's not the same level of
Mm,
income. You have the issue also of one of the spouses who wasn't working in Hong
hmm
Kong, whereas in France, usually you have
Everyone's working.
everybody works in France. Yeah.
Maybe it is because a lot of the people in Hong Kong they've come on expatriate salaries. And so the income level is higher, but also the taxation level is significantly lower. So there is more
Mm.
disposable income, and people kind of get used to a lifestyle where maybe one spouse can work and the other spouse can stay at home. Yeah.
And I think what's difficult also is that the one that doesn't work usually doesn't want to know about
Mm,
all the financial side, so doesn't know
yeah.
anything, has high expectation, thinking she or he must be
Yeah.
earning, a
hmm
lot, so I'm entitled to a lot. And then when you
Yeah.
really get into it, it's not, what they thought it would be. Because there's this, when you're an expat and you're not working, you tend to lose grip with the
Mm,
reality, I would say. That's the main problem.
yeah. Sarah Jane, I'm thinking about is having couples who separate here in Hong Kong, and then sometimes one of them will relocate back to France. And I think one of the concerns is for the remaining parent, is that even if there is an agreement around what will happen with the children's arrangements, with the finances, there is this fear about what does that mean if the person who's now in France with the children wants to change things? What does that look like? Because one of the things we talk about often is mirror orders, but how are those received in France?
Well, first of all, if you have your court order in Hong Kong, it may not be
Mm,
enforceable in France. You may have to do something for
right.
it to be enforceable, first of all. With children, if you have a court order and you want to change it, you'll have to go to
Mm,
court. But it's not automatically mirrored. So unless you can agree to things, you'll have to go to court to change
yeah.
things. And for instance, we often see the problem is when you have young
Mm,
children and the parents don't want to let them travel
yeah.
alone, which I can understand. It can be a bit daunting. You can see that the 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 access of one
Mm,
parent to the children may be reduced because of the fact that no one
mhm,
can go and pick up the children. Or so this is something that you really, because that's the main
yeah.
problem. Usually it's access to
Yeah.
the children. It's really something that they really have to work on. Usually I always recommend mediation
Mm,
anyway for those issues, because you really have to think until at what age will you be able to let them travel
yeah.
alone. And also, the idea that might not stay in Hong Kong, they might go to another, the person who stayed in Hong Kong might be traveling around. And really think of, will they be another member of the family that can travel with
Mm,
them? In the Hong Kong side, it could be the
yeah.
helper. But it's very difficult to get a visa. So it's all those issues that, yeah, even though you have a court
Mm,
order, it may be difficult. Well, it's the same for everything.
yeah.
Even if you're in the same country, things evolve, the children grow up, and things that you had decided when they were 3 are not applicable when they're enforceable when they're 13. But it's even more complicated because you have to go, yeah, it's a different jurisdiction, so you have to go to court and try and have things amended by a judge who might not always understand how it
Yeah.
works. That's the main issue
Yeah.
also.
I mean, I was,
Doesn't understand how it works in Hong
yeah.
Kong.
Well, or even just terminology, because one of the things I was thinking about is for Australian, because I'm accredited in Australia, it's not unusual that if one of them is relocating, I will use Australian terminology as well as the Hong Kong terminology so that they have at least, even if that doesn't go into their Hong Kong court order, they at least have a document which has got both so that they know well, this is what we were trying to achieve. And I'm
achieve,
just
yeah.
wondering, is that something that you would suggest to your French clients who are getting orders in Hong Kong or mediating in Hong Kong to at least include French terminology?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's something, yes, that you can do, but I mean, a judge would understand
Mm.
in France. You know,
Yeah.
it's although it's different words, you get the
Okay.
gist. But yeah, it is a good idea to use,
Yeah.
yeah, the terminology. But because it's between Australia and Hong Kong, it's
Yes.
English, whereas between Hong Kong and France, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
another language anyway. So it's not as important, I
Mm.
think, as between Australia and Hong Kong, where maybe using a different word has a completely different meaning. I don't know if that's the case.
So actually, the
Yeah,
mediation agreement can be binding on them in Australia in a way that maybe it wouldn't be in France.
und
Yeah.
wie. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if people are struggling with the, okay, well, now one parent's here and we need to make changes, then are people mediating in France or is mediation not really popular?
Yeah, it's get well. I would say a lot of family lawyers are now mediators. So you have different kinds
Mm.
of mediation, but you have very accessible mediation in your every town
Yeah.
hall, or you'll have mediation local, not town hall maybe, but a lot of
Yeah.
association that offer mediation at a very,
Yeah.
cheap rates for people who can't afford to go to court. So we're trying to there's really, like everywhere, I guess, a realization that mediation
Mm.
is the way to go to reduce expenses, reduce emotional, ups and downs. And so mediation is we're getting there. And also it can be ordered by the
Oh,
courts.
okay.
So the courts can decide that at some point the couple should go through mediation. It can be court ordered. So there is people, have the choice to go through mediation. And as we both know, in international context, it's the best way to try and solve things before going to court or while they're in court, trying to do mediation to speed up the process.
Yes. Yeah.
But definitely they need to talk because they, as you know, it's especially when they're
Mm.
children, going to court when to try and obtain a court order to be able to leave Hong Kong, for instance. You never know at the end whether you're going to leave or stay or leave. So for the children, it's much better if people can just sit down with you and talk about how, what's best for the children, what's best. And I know it's always difficult, but that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's no good ways, but it's just what's the least bad way? Because I think one
Exactly.
challenge that I think people have when they're particularly around their children's arrangements, and I don't know whether this is the same in France, but the court has a broad brush. It is not going to. So it may say something like reasonable access, but are they going to go in to figure out how are you going to actually split school holidays? What are you going to do around extracurriculars? How are you going to sort out school camp? They're not going to do that. They're not going to talk about parent co-parenting guidelines. And so I think for parents there is this, if you want to try and get the actual roadmap for how co-parenting will look,
Yeah.
you're not going to get that in court. But I don't know if that's the same in France.
It's the
Yeah.
same because they don't have
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't. You feel like they haven't read the file, you know. Sometimes,
Yeah.
it's really like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like, yeah, especially with multicultural
Mm.
families where you'll have holidays that are important for
Yeah.
one couple, one spouse, one parent. If
Yeah.
you take the example that we have, it's Chinese holiday versus
Mm.
Christmas, you know. So making sure that what is important, a judge won't look into
Yeah.
that. So if you don't really think about, if you really want to have your children for your birthday, the judge
Yeah.
won't think of that. It's,
Yes.
you have to, and you don't even, when you're separating, you don't really think
No.
about that. You think, I want 50% of the time with my child. That's all I want,
Yeah.
I won't have less,
Yes.
things like that. Whereas if you look, what does 50% mean?
Yeah. But I think you're right. It's
It's,
also
and
people
that's
get stuck in the quantitative, but it's actually the qualitative is what we're talking about.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what an issue in France, because
Mm.
alternate parenting is bigger than it is in Hong
Right.
Kong. People really share, well, they try to do a
Week
week
about. Yeah.
on and a week off, yeah. So that's really difficult, because then they try to do, you'll start from the Wednesday to, yes, but I'll have one day less than you. And
Mm.
it's all those things that you really, if you don't sit down and discuss
Yeah.
it, it's very well to say, yeah, it's 50-50, but when do you pick up the children? Is it after school
Yeah.
on Friday, or if they have school on Saturday? It's all
Yeah.
that makes that's when people will have a court order in France, but won't be able to
Mm.
agree on how it is actually enforced, because all the technicalities won't be included unless their
Right.
lawyer has done the
Yeah.
job and written, which they usually do, to be fair.
Yeah.
If you're a good family lawyer with a
Yeah.
lot of practice, you know that you need, but even being able to negotiate with another
Mm.
lawyer on those issues is very, very difficult. Well, it takes a lot of
Yeah.
time.
I mean, I guess I would say here that people can get a court order, but how you live it, that's the work that you'll do in mediation because a judge won't do that with you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because you've got to
Exactly.
go and live that order. And what does equal time? Who knows what that means?
And there are things when you think clients really, I don't know if it's the same in Hong Kong. Because in Hong Kong, I feel the system is different, because usually you have a
Mm.
helper that, deals with all
Handovers.
helps dealing with that,
Yeah.
handovers and communication and all. But in France, you'll
Mm.
have issues of clothes, and
Same.
you
It's the
didn't,
same.
you didn't bring the clothes back. The clothes are dirty, they should be
Yes.
cleaned. And I talk about that, because when that
Yeah.
happens, I'm just like,
Yeah.
really? Can't you buy another pair of socks?
Yes. Or also, I've bought for
Things
the
like,
children, therefore they have to stay in my house. But the
exactly,
child's reading
that's what I
that
was
book
getting to. It's
and they not.
but
Yeah.
they tend, and that's what, everywhere, I guess, they tend to forget what the best interest of the child
Yeah. Well, I
is.
think it's the
That's, yeah.
it's the it's the inability to separate the end of the adult intimate relationship from the continuation of the co-parenting relationship. I think it is hard. I mean, I don't know if this is the same because obviously the system in Hong Kong is common law, so it is adversarial as opposed to France where it's civil law and inquisitorial. But one of the challenges I think for parents who don't seek mediation but try and go through the courts, particularly around their children's matters, where they're going to have to try and work together later, is the affidavits that you're going to file will essentially paint the other person as this monster who should never be allowed near humans, let alone children. And to come out on the other side of that and be able to co parent is almost impossible, if not actually impossible. If parents can't use mediation and they go through court, do they also need to go through this very adversarial
We
process?
do, well, it's not, I think that the affidavit are brutal, to say the least, because it's really, I remember holding, that's what I do, hold hands on my client
Yeah.
who's working with, a solicitor, going through that, and they're saying, why do I have to do that? And trying to find, the little details that in France, what happens is you do in your
Mm,
petition, of course, but there's no
mm.
affidavit. In your petition, you will describe your ex-partner,
Okay.
partner, and you can add some, how do you call it? When you ask somebody to swear on, well, like an
Yes.
affidavit, but in France, it's like you have a
Yep.
form that somebody fills in with, this person is a very bad parent because
Oh
I
my
saw them,
gosh.
they wouldn't buy an
Yes.
ice cream
Yeah.
for them. I mean, that type. So you have loads
Yes.
of those, I don't know what you call it,
It's the
affirmation,
it's the
and you
the
sign them.
details for the grounds for the
Yeah.
claims that you're making.
So you'll have loads.
Yeah.
They all say the same thing. They saw once that, they shouted at their child, so they must be
They
a
must be.
terrible person in front of the school because they were late. You know, so it's all those. So
Right.
that's, but I don't think it's as brutal as the affidavit because the judge, I don't think the judge looks at all
Mm.
the testimonies,
Yeah.
whatever. But there's the same idea. But in France, we tend to say we don't want to go into that. For instance, there are less divorce by fault,
Right.
which is the kind of divorce where you're going to do that. In the rest, it's more about, okay, we're getting a divorce because of
Yeah.
that, and they will try and depict them as a bad parent because that's what you want to
Yeah.
do. But usually they know that unless there's
Mm.
violence against the child, or there's, that there's a problem with one of the parent, judge will want that the child see both
Yes.
parents anyway.
Yeah.
So that's the main objective, that the child can have a relationship with both. So it's not really, well, I'm telling you that because that's not what I would do anyway. But I guess, as always, there will be family lawyers who will
Yes.
do that, even though it's not
Yeah.
necessary. But I would say it's not something you need to do because in France, we don't
Yeah.
encourage that.
Okay.
I'm not. I don't know. I feel that in Hong Kong, it's part. My client asks me for prices, and they see the difference just for the initial
Mm.
petition, and they say, "What's the difference?" And I say, "Well, there's a long affidavit to do, and that takes a lot of time. Just that's the
Yeah. Yeah.
first thing you do, basically. So that's why it's quite expensive.
Or you could do 12-month separation
Make a
with
difference.
consent.
Exactly. Yeah, it does
It
exist.
does. Yes, no, if people come to mediation, I'm always trying to encourage them because it's just like, I mean, why, why do that? If you don't have to, let's just choose the least inflammatory path.
Yeah, and in France, we're lucky in a way because now we have this divorce by
Mm.
consent where you don't have to go to
Okay.
court. So it's really helpful. I always advise do mediation, do that type, and it's done.
Yeah.
Or if you really, sometimes it's difficult to do, but it's basically a divorce with your lawyers. You
Mm.
sign an agreement and then it's registered with a notary. So it can be done really
Yeah.
quickly. A month. Well, let's say 3 months
Yeah, no,
to
no.
be,
I'm just kidding.
to get all the paperwork. But,
Yeah.
when you can do
Oh, yeah.
that, plus the mediation, let's say 6 months to get a divorce. I mean, when people can think clearly,
Yeah.
it's the best way to do it. But you can also, like in Hong Kong, people will agree that they need to divorce, but they don't agree on the
Mm.
consequences. But they can file a joint petition saying we agree on divorce, we just
Mm.
need to deal with the consequences. So it's all those things that help deal with the divorce in a more amicable way.
Yeah. Well, and also I think what we're really experiencing here is in a more efficient, less expensive, less punitive way for everybody. Because at the moment, we're looking at 2 to 3 years if you're going to go through court, plus waiting minimum 9 months
Yeah,
to get a
same.
judgment. I think people don't necessarily understand that timeline. Things can really, if they get stuck in the court process, they can really drag on.
Yeah. In France, you'll have at the first hearing, in your initial
Yeah.
petition, you have one part about the whole
Hmm.
divorce
Yeah.
process, what you want in the divorce, and the second part is interim
Mm.
measures. If you don't, I
Yes.
mean, that's really
Yeah.
important because at the first hearing, that's what you'll
Yeah.
get. If you don't put your interim measures, you won't get
Yeah.
them. But they lawyers don't usually
No,
forget.
no, no. Sarah Jane, I'm conscious of time. Can I ask you for some top things that you think French clients who are looking to divorce in Hong Kong should be aware of, or they should be conscious of when they're thinking about taking steps to, so I guess find a French speaking lawyer. Not that easy to do in Hong Kong, but that would be step one. But is there anything else that you think they should be
Yeah.
just conscious of?
Well, they're usually conscious about the costs that they're very conscious of. And what's really, it's not so much about finding a French speaking lawyer, it's finding a lawyer who can explain both
Mm,
sides, like how the common law
mm,
system works and how the civil, and can
yeah.
compare and give, so that, because what's really for French people wanting to divorce in Hong Kong, they don't know who to turn to. Well, they'll go to a French lawyer in Paris who might not know
Mm,
how it works in Hong Kong. So we'll tell them, you need to divorce in France. You
yeah,
need
yeah,
to, because otherwise they lose. Yeah. And in Hong Kong, they will tell them, you need to divorce in Hong Kong because if you're not working, you'll get higher maintenance, whatever. So it's really about finding a lawyer that can give you a clear
mm,
picture of what you can do, because some people think, oh, I'm living in Hong Kong, so I need to divorce in Hong Kong, I don't have any choice, or I was married in Hong Kong, so I need to
mm,
divorce in Hong Kong. So that there's those
yeah,
ideas. So I think that's the most important thing that I always say is really, because the systems are, as we've
mm,
discussed, so
yeah.
different between the two. And going to if even that's why I work in Hong Kong and I work in France, because I will usually help the French lawyer in
Mm,
France understand how it works in Hong
right.
Kong, to explain it to the judge that everything is
Hmm.
expensive, that you work a
Yeah,
lot, but you have a helper, that if you even if your parents are working, the helper is like a second
yeah,
mum.
yeah,
So it's perfectly normal to be with the
yes,
helper whilst parents are working. That a judge will
yeah,
not comprehend that, because in France it's not, no, those things.
yeah,
And same in Hong Kong, I will help Hong Kong lawyers explain how it works in
yeah,
France. So I think what's the most important is getting the right
mm,
information on both jurisdiction, so that you can make your own
yeah,
choice. Because often the example I give is, people are living in Hong Kong, they divorce in Hong Kong, but all their assets in
hmm,
France. So if you have to divide assets or sell assets, well, the court order that you'll have to
mm,
use will need to be turned into a quarter in
mm,
France, basically. So it's a year. It can take, depending on the
yeah,
courts, can take a year to 18 months more. So usually I say, if all your assets in France, maybe you should do everything in France, because the notary will
yeah,
do the division of assets. Those type of very well, of course, lawyers have other ideas, but look at what is easiest and the
yeah,
cheapest, because if you have all your assets and you have to pay again, whereas if you get your order directly in France, then everything can be done. And the other thing is that people will forget about the tax
mm,
issues. They do their divorce
yeah,
in Hong Kong and forget that they'll have to pay taxes on the division of
hmm,
assets in France. So it's really
yeah,
important, even if you go and see a Hong Kong lawyer, to have the advice from a French lawyer to tell you everything you need to think about, and vice
yeah,
versa.
yeah.
That's what I find that people really lack, is the real, the advice, the whole package on the advice
Mm.
at the first, the beginning.
Well, I guess that's,
Then you can make your
yeah. Well,
choice.
I was guess that's the thing. It's kind of having the whole picture. You can then make decisions, but also informed decisions, because otherwise you're going to be playing catch up or
Informed.
trying to put band-aids on things, which can be more expensive and
Yeah.
time consuming later on. Oh, so Sarah Jane, thank you so much, because you're actually on holiday. So thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Salah. It's been a pleasure.
And
Thank you
I
so
will share
much.
Sarah Jane's details in the description box. But thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Map the Maze. Okay, bye bye. Thanks, Sarah Jane.
Bye.